think that the thing that's changing so much about Oklahoma to let this be more of an interesting topic is the recruiting battles that they're in on the defensive side of the ball. They've got they had the top overall defensive player in the 2023 class visit the barbecue, and he is extremely high on Oklahoma. Since when have you ever seen in the last 5 to 10 years a number one player in the country that's really, really pro Oklahoma? So I think that's the change, obviously, that we're seeing from a recruiting perspective. And there's two parts of it, Mark. When you get the kids on campus, and then you got to develop them, which Oklahoma under Grinch has been able to do that so far. They've and he's got his kids in right now, so I think he's got at least as close to it as he's been since he's been here. So having his kids on campus, having developing the kids that were already there, it's certainly a big year for them, because we know that Oklahoma's offense is going to be good enough to win the national title. Can the defense get there? They were really close. I think they were, should they have made the playoff last year, would have been interesting to see, how close they were. But yeah, if this team is not, I would say, a top 20, 25 defense this year, I would be surprised.
Yeah, and of course the battle's not won yet, but it's pretty masterful to witness what Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch and the entire defensive coaching staff is accomplishing from a recruiting perspective, because I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago that as I talk recruiting with yourself and then across the nation, and specifically with a lot of SEC media people, and look at Oklahoma time after time after time after time, as I go through the top, let's say 20 or 30 players, and especially defensive players in the nation coming out of the South, and seeing that a majority of them have Oklahoma on their short list, that you would not have seen players in Georgia and Florida with Oklahoma on a short list of 3 or 4, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Of course, they're always going to be able to get a certain level of talent, even on the defensive side, but to consider that there has to be a level of negative recruiting out there from the opposition to say, hey, playing the SEC, sure, you're going to play some decent football at Oklahoma, but if you want to go, all they have to do is roll out the numbers and say, we produce this many NFL draft selections on the defensive side of the ball. We have this many this many of that. Ohio State, et cetera, can make those statements. Well, Oklahoma is trying to buck a trend of the last, what would you say, 10 or 15 years in the Big 12, and especially at OU?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think the last 10, 15 years, specifically the last 10 years, without a doubt, that's the case. And you know what? Winning heals all wounds, right? So if Oklahoma's doing this still without winning a playoff game, and they're, what does that look like if they win a playoff game or even win a national championship? Because, I think it's one thing to see regionally. A lot of people, some people even obviously picking Oklahoma to get to the playoffs, but I've seen a lot more people ranking Oklahoma number 1 preseason. I've seen a lot of people picking Oklahoma to win the national championship nationally, at some of the major media sites that you wouldn't have seen before. So I think Oklahoma, if they're able to win a playoff game or a national championship, that even accentuates that a little bit more than what they've been able to do now.
I got to tell you, I'm going to be in a quandary about what to do with Oklahoma myself, because I'm going to make my predictions at some point, and I take a level of pride in not just being accurate, not just being accurate, but also part of prediction, if you really want to be decent at it or show yourself to be decent, is to be able to get ahead of the curve, to be able to project something or see something happening before it actually happens. For the people that pick Alabama to win the national championship game, and they do, well, that's all you can do is pick the national championship game winner. But you've done something that 80% of the country did. Right. But if you can get out ahead of the curve and say, I saw this, I saw where Oklahoma was going to be able to take this additional step.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Mark. Over the last couple of weeks, I've done, and maybe we can get into this at some point, is really went through top to bottom, number 130 to number 1, and really kind of started putting those teams in some slots and ranking those. But as you look at the top 5, I think it's so interesting because you can make a very solid case for any one of those teams to win the national championship, and I don't think you would be crazy at all. Each one of them have holes, obviously, in their resume, but you take Clemson, you take Georgia, you take Alabama, you take Oklahoma, you take Ohio State. Any of those teams, you can make a very, very solid case for one of those to win a national championship. And it's almost when you rank them, it's almost a 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E. Me personally, and this may make some local people mad, I think Georgia, you had mentioned to this, I think Georgia is the most talented team in the country overall, especially with getting Eric Gilbert, especially with getting the Kendrick kid from Clemson. I think their one weakness that I thought was the back end. Having Kendrick there helps solidifies that back end a little bit.
And they got Tyke Smith from West Virginia.
Oh, yep, that's right. So those two kids. So that really certainly helps them from a back end perspective. I mean, the one concern that maybe I would have with them is, JT Daniels is a little bit injury prone. What do they do if he is out, because Stetson Bennett's not going to be able to get the job done there. So I mean that's the one maybe concern that I would have, from Georgia's perspective. When you look at Clemson, I think Clemson, if for any other year, I think they may take a little bit of a step backwards this year. The offensive line was exposed last year in the playoffs. The secondary was exposed a little bit in the playoffs, and if DJ gets hurt, they don't. With their backup quarterback, going down in the spring game, they don't have a lot behind him. When you look at Alabama, I mean, they're going to be talented, obviously. World class talented from a college football perspective, but so many kids that they have to break in on the offensive side of the ball. Defense is going to be their strength. They're going to be great on the defensive side of the ball. Ohio State, I'm not as concerned maybe as a lot of people would be at the quarterback position. They're going to have a kid that's going to, if it's Stroud or whoever it might be, he's going to play well and you obviously have them pegged much, much closer than I do. Maybe the linebacker core maybe is a little bit of a concern, maybe the secondary a little bit, but I would. It's tough to call any of them, but looking at it right now, I know you have the Kirby Smart factor, and is he going to do something crazy to really derail the Bulldogs? But if I had to say it right now, I would say Georgia's the most. Not saying that they're going to win the championship. This isn't a prediction. I just think they're the most talented team on both sides of the ball.
As soon as last season's national championship game was over, within the next couple of weeks, I released my way too early top 25. Mm-hmm. And I didn't look at schedules. I made this very clear to everyone, even though I got a ton of calls and people saying, well, don't you know that they got to play so-and-so? I'm not looking at schedules. I am listing who I believe to be the 25 best teams in the country, top to bottom, top to 25. And I had Georgia at number 1. Mm-hmm. Again, that doesn't mean they're going to win the national championship, and they lost their best receiver since then.
Yeah,
but they did pick up a 5-star receiver / tight end in Gilbert, and a player who would have been a borderline first-round NFL draft selection at cornerback from Clemson. So the thing about the quarterback position, and of course Alabama and Ohio State are the two teams that are basically going to play a completely inexperienced quarterback. A couple things I will say to that is that number one, people may be surprised. I made the statement a couple weeks ago that if you look at the last 8 national championship games, so there are 16 participants in the national championship game in the last 8 years. 8 of those 16 starting quarterbacks had no experience when the season started. None. Or maybe like 4 attempts like Bryce Young had last year. Basically, no starting experience, none. Half of the teams that made the national championship game since 2013. The other thing is that at a place like Ohio State, and I'm sure I'm not as familiar with the backups at Alabama, although Paul Tyson is their immediate backup. But the three guys at Ohio State, they're all 5 stars or extremely high 4 stars. So you got to think the odds are, even if they make a misevaluation in August, that by week 2 they say, okay, we'll yank him and we'll put him, that one of them is going to come through.
Right. Yeah.
And put up the 40 touchdown passes and the 4,000 yards passing and just fill in, the Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields spot and be nearly as good. And they've got, probably void of Iowa State, where Oklahoma was that significantly better than everybody in the Big 12 for a few years, enough of a lead on the rest of the conference that they don't have to be at their best until December.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the problem I think everybody has coming in is they think, oh, they got a brand new quarterback. They're not going to be, they're not going to be quite as good. When you have an incredible surrounding cast like Ohio State's going to have, an incredibly good offensive line, the best receiving core in the country. I'll say this until the season starts, until they prove me wrong. I think Ohio State has the best receiving core, and I don't really think it's particularly close. Specifically from a true freshman on who all they have coming in. They just have tons and tons of talent. So one of the things that I kind of think about when I was ranking a lot of my teams is I look at quarterback play, offensive line, and defensive line. Those are my 3 highest weighted really categories when I think about it, because if you have a really strong offensive line that makes a average quarterback good, a good quarterback great. Same thing with the running backs. If you have a great offensive line, those running backs look much better than maybe they would already. And Ohio State is really good on both sides of the line, offense and defense. Yeah, maybe they have some question marks in the linebacker area and the secondary, but that defensive line will help things along a little bit. And to your point about the schedule in the Big Ten in terms of, exactly who they play, yeah, you're right. They don't have to be good until December. I think Penn State's going to be a lot better than maybe people think this year. I think they're going to have a big bounce back year, but they get that game in Columbus this year, I believe. And you always have Michigan out there. Not sure what that's going to look like. From specifically a quarterback perspective, there McNamara is probably the guy, but it should be interesting to see. Yeah, the conference isn't as strong. You've got probably Iowa or Wisconsin to worry about in December, but yeah, that's when they need to be at their best.
Our guy 904 Hurricane, of course, a Miami fan, follows us on all these live streams, and we appreciate him stopping by. Just reminding everyone that we got 70-some people on the line. Let's see, we're at about 85 on the line. So we appreciate that the numbers are growing each week, and would ask everyone to, hey, grab 3 or 4 people that that love OU football just as much as you do, or college football in general, and let them know that we're here live every Friday. But also hit the like button, because if we've got 85 on the line, I can guarantee you that there have been 400 to 500 people come through here in the last hour, and we need more likes than that, please. All right, I guess we'll clean it up, see if there's anything else. I don't know if you see anything else in the chat to address.
Yeah, while you're looking, I'll see one that you passed by, and there was a question, and we've seen this question a little bit through the summer and the spring. If Oklahoma wins a national championship in 2021, does Alex Grinch leave? And we've answered that question. I've answered it a couple of times, and as I think about it this year, if Oklahoma wins the national championship, it will mean that Oklahoma's defense is maybe top even 15, top 20, and you got to think the change that Alex Grinch has been able to instill, and not only the talent but the culture at Oklahoma, that would probably land him a job. Obviously, it would be important to understand exactly which jobs would be open. Obviously, he's not going to take certainly something just to take it from a defensive coordinator at Oklahoma. He's going to want a Power 5 job. He's going to want a a fairly high profile Power 5 job. He basically said thanks, no thanks, and to Washington State a couple years ago. There was a job that opened last year that he was kind of in discussions on in terms of a guy that was high on their priority list. So I think I would be, if Oklahoma was in the national championship and the defense is obviously a big part of that, I would be maybe a little bit surprised to see him be back with the team in 2022 if the right job comes available. Of course, if the right job's not available, he'll continue to stay at Oklahoma until that right job comes. But I would say if you said 3 years from now, I would say no.
Okay. Got Jason Ray here talking Oklahoma football with all of us every Friday. So we appreciate everybody being here, but mostly appreciate Jason and his expertise in covering Oklahoma. Follow him on Last Word on College Football. It's lastwordoncollegefootball.com. And they do a great job over there, and they've been a great support and help to me, no doubt about that, here at the Voice of College Football. So again, everybody, grab 3 or 4 friends, bring them on in here next Friday